Right, we're going to do a quick video around the checklist items to consider when installing some new hardware. So I've got a server here, and we want this to go and be installed in a comms room, data center, either your own or a shared one. First thing we should consider is just when we're getting it delivered, what are the delivery times, who's going to accept that delivery, you're going to deliver it yourself, or is it going to come from the manufacturer, who's going to receive it, who's just going to check the stuff that you think should be in the box is in the box. Next, we want to make sure that we've actually got somewhere to store that box if it's not going to get unpacked immediately. You can see here there's a cage on the left with some boxes securely stored. You want to make sure that you've got some rack space allocated, it's actually available. You don't just have full racks. Now we're going to start looking at cabling availability and patching here. In the yellow, we've got the network ports and these devices that need to go somewhere. So we're either going to patch those through via the patch panels in the rack, and obviously there needs to be some space or some ports free on those racks. And we're either going to be considering copper or fiber. Copper shown there at the top, fiber at the bottom. So we do need to know what sort of cables we need as a result, and the type of ends, fiber. We've got LC and LS from memory, RJ45 always with copper. And what we're doing here is we're connecting our hardware that's sitting in the rack via these top of rack switches. That's what I meant when I said we need to make sure that we've got capacity either on the switch direct or via a patch panel so it can get back to something, so we've got connectivity. So make sure there's capacity there too, otherwise your new hardware is not going to do anything. Now we also want to make sure that our hardware, if it's going in with rails, and that's the easiest way to get things in and out of a rack, those rails, well, you need to have some. You can see those are attached inside the rack there. It's shown without the sides on. It's just the vertical structure of the rack where the rails go in, and then the rails get attached to the side of the hardware, and then you can just slide things in and out. This is important, of course, for cable length as well. If you're using rails and your cables are really tight, well, you can't pull things out. It's amazing how often that can happen. Then we need to be able to get from our rack to somewhere else. Earlier it showed the top of rack switch getting to somewhere else, to our aggregation switch. Maybe it's to get our hardware to another device that's in another rack somewhere. And that's all done by the cross-connect cabling. You can see the cross-connect cable trays in yellow. That's how we get between the racks. This is important because in shared data centers, that cross-connect cabling can often only be done by the data center operators. If it's your own data center environment, the thing to bear in mind is that often needs people with ladders and working at heights, and it's just things to get in place in advance, the cross-connect cabling, and make those appearances via the patch panels that we mentioned earlier. We want to make sure there's enough aircon. Obviously, in data centers that you're using from someone else, they just take care of this. But sometimes when you're loading up extra hardware and then more and more hardware results in more and more racks, the aircon starts to get to its limits. So just keep in mind your install might be the one that crosses things over. Aircon there shown on the walls up near the ceiling, separate units. So if one fails, the other ones aren't affected. So you have some N+1 there on the aircon. Cable tidiness, getting between things, either if it's cross-connect cabling via the trays or it's between devices in a rack. You don't want this. You just get problems. Cables get knocked out. Cables, it's hard to troubleshoot if you're trying to, if you've got a connectivity problem. And cables also get damaged. They get stretched. They get pulled. This is a little bit better. At least the cables are going in via the. They've got some good management there, and you can also see between some of the devices they've actually got the ability to bring cable management. Those white horizontal cable management spaces, they actually allow you to do that. So if you've got just devices backed up against each other, taking over the whole rack, cable management gets really hard. So that should be part of the thinking. Again, here's some nice cable management, even though they don't have the horizontal cable management trays. They do have nicely done with Velcro. Dust protection really depends if you're in an environment that needs dust protection. Hopefully those racks have already got it, and there's doors and maybe even filters. If that's not in place and it's really dusty, it is something to consider. We also want to have power availability. These power rails, they'll either be vertical or horizontal in the rack. These can often all just be full because people put in devices with multiple power supplies, so they use up all those power outlets on those power rails. So you bring your new hardware in and you can't get any power. So you want to check that out first as well. Or you might have a UPS in the rack if it's not room-based power. UPS shown here. Yeah, it is interesting on room-based power. If you're not aware, you'll have some sort of diesel generator down on the left, so that if your main transformer and your grid power up on the top left fails, it'll actually provide longer term power, longer than the batteries can do. And you can see batteries in the middle. So batteries kick in first. So they then fail. Diesel generator provides the power. Here's some. You've never seen it. Some battery backup for room-based power. Only usually in bigger data centers, and there's a diesel generator. And lastly, make sure you get some form of documentation, so your device that you've put in your hardware gets represented on that documentation. So if you found that interesting, there's a whole lot of other items that we've got on our website, IT checklist for deploying hardware. So everything from the environmentals, rack preparation, some tips. We didn't talk much about network preparation in terms of the logical side, getting IP addresses and what have you. And that might be helpful if you're having to consider something like this in your own work.